tell us your Peace Church story.
Well, the story with Peace Church started when John and I first got married. John had been trying to volunteer for alternative service for about 8 years when I met him, and we got married, the first day I met him, I had been dating. I was in graduate school in Minneapolis. Had been dating Muslim and Jewish and Catholic boys, and decided if I wanted to meet any Methodists, I probably should go to the Methodist Church. And so I went to the Methodist Church, and they announced at that church service that John Hawley was going to be refusing induction into the U.S. military the next day. And he was at UTS in seminary at that point, and they were going to, the UTS faculty was going to come and do a prayer vigil on the Hennepin County steps. And he was one of the earliest draft resistors in Minneapolis when he first was refused induction. I think there'd only been a couple of other people. So after church that day that I heard this, I was invited to go out to lunch with a group of the people, and so I went out to lunch and I think sat next to John. I thought, he's a nice man, and when he's in prison, I'll write to him, because we all assumed that he would go to prison for refusing induction. But when he was prosecuted, Judge Miles Lord threw it out because they had refused him his 1-0 status because he was a Methodist, and Methodists could kill. He wasn't Quaker. And by that time, the Supreme Court, unbeknownst to the draft board of Sioux City, Iowa, had declared that the belief that you could not kill was not based on your religion, and so that you could not refuse the status on that basis. So Judge Miles Lord threw the case out, and so we got married later, and like about a week after we got married, he got a second draft notice. And so he went and refused induction again. And by this time, this had to have been a year or more later. And by this time, there were like several hundred draft resistors in Minneapolis, and they brought in several hundred FBI agents to interview everybody. So the FBI came calling at our house, which was interesting. And they decided that since he was almost 26, that he was not a bomb-throwing radical, and to give him his 1-0 status and order him to do alternative service. And this was winter of 1970, and it was the height of unemployment, and if you could not take a job from a veteran if you were a conscience objector. So I was in graduate school in Minneapolis, not done, a couple years from being done, and so he's trying to find a job in Minneapolis, and he wrote for a month-long extension because of the time that they had given him. He had 2 jobs that he considered, and they said, "Oh, we're sorry, you can't take either one of those jobs anyway, because you have to go 150 miles from your home to be, consistent with what happens in the military." And we were fine with that. Friend said, "Well, why don't we go to Duluth, because my father is just stepped down as the assistant provost, and he can help John get a job." And so she brought us to Duluth for the weekend, and her dad helped John find a job with the community schools. And that was fine. He had a very supportive boss and really enjoyed that, and that's how we found our house on the hillside. And anyway, then after we had been here a little while, I began to want to I felt like I was running back and forth between Minneapolis every other weekend, and then I guess by the time I've skipped a little bit. So we moved to Duluth, and then after the first year, he changed jobs because the fellow that was his boss was leaving, and the new guy was a vet, and his old boss said, I think you should find a different job. And that was when he went looking for a job in Duluth and found the Ministry of Outreach at Gloria Day. And so then when he came up, when he went to Gloria Day, he figured out fairly quickly that there were too many people trying to do things without any kind of coordination. And so he invited, I think, 10 or 11 other churches to come together for a dinner and proposed the idea that they should work together. And that was the night they formed Chum. So on weekends when I would come up, we would go to different churches every weekend because John wanted to go to all the Chum churches, and he was sometimes preaching at them. And at some point I said, I need something stable in my life. And it may have been 1975 by this time, I'm not sure, because I think I may have been teaching it done with my degree at UMD at the medical school. And they had me teaching undergraduates in the area on a grant to improve the quality of undergraduate education for applicants to the medical school. So, and I felt, I don't want to say comfortable because I'm always reminded of Dick Gazy, who somebody said he should go to the Duluth Congregational because he would be comfortable there. And he said, I don't think you should be comfortable at church. But I liked the people and I liked the mission, and Greg and Sue Flint had become really good friends, and so at that point we joined Peace Church, and I have no idea what year it was, but that's how we got to Peace Church, and we've been here ever since, despite 12 years.
What does it mean to you to be part of Peace?
It means to me that I belong to a community where people are heard. And people listen to other people, and people they're grateful for what they have, and they want to share and to help other people. And it's a very perhaps liberal viewpoint of helping other people. It's comfortable in that I know that I can say certain things that are to other people. I have a new friend that I don't know the politics, and so I don't feel like I should say certain things that I know with people from Peace Church, that there's an understanding, and even if they're not in absolute agreement, that they would understand why I would say something like that. So it's been such a wonderful group of people to work with and to be with and to be friends with. It's, I especially during the last 7 years, I don't know what I would have done without Peace. So, well, so I was hired away from the medical school to teach in Dominica in the West Indies at a medical school, huge medical school that was designed to feed into the U.S. medical system. But the U.S. has regulations. You can't teach primary or the basic science to medical students as a for-profit school in the United States. And so that's why the for-profit schools start off in some place like the Caribbean. And there are probably 70 Caribbean schools, most of which are not legitimate, or not very good at least. But anyway, so we moved to the Caribbean, and we thought we would be gone for 3 to 5 years, and instead we were gone for 12. And so we would come back to Peace. And what's interesting is we never found a church in Dominica, and part of that was they weren't air conditioned and it's very hot inside buildings. And that's the only time. I would have worried about John passing out. He doesn't do well in heat. Didn't do well in heat. Anyway, when we came back then, and we ended up staying 12 years, and one of the reasons we came back was John was beginning to show some signs that he was going to have some mental decline. And so I gave my 6 months notice, and actually a week before we were supposed to, my resignation date, Maddie was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And so we came back even faster because we didn't take the month we were going to sort out our junk. Instead, we had a moving company pack up our junk and bring it back. And our house wasn't done, so we were living with friends, but Peace Church was here. And John got back into singing in the choir, and you know, that was one of his favorite things, and into harbor masters, and those were probably his favorite things in the world to do, besides Lumosity on his computer, which he was very good at it, right up to the end. Anyway, ultimately, towards the end of the first year back, it was a little more than a year. The second summer back, we went back to Dominica. And when we came back, and 10 days and had a wonderful time, when we came back, Nat was really limping around, and her knee had been hurting probably since March. They'd taken her to the doctor in March, and they said, oh, it's growing pains, because it was on and off, but the child didn't tell us when she was in pain, so it was more on than we realized. And she was going off to language camp, and so I said, Nat, you need to go have that knee looked at before you go to language camp. And it turned out the physician was not real happy about Kate showing up after work at like about 7 o'clock on a Saturday night with a kid who had had problems for quite a while. She took the x-rays and immediately started making calls, and Nat was diagnosed, I think, the next Friday with osteosarcoma. And so that was a long battle. And so I was, we were trying to finish the house, and I was commuting back and forth, and John and I were commuting back and forth on weekends to help take care of Maddie. Though sometimes John stayed up here so he could sing in choir, and I would go down. And then began the I don't know how to describe it, because it was a wonderful time and it was an awful time. The kids and Kate moved back in with us because they'd been living in the house, and by this time we had finished the addition and had an extra bedroom, and we had fixed an apartment for ourselves in the basement before we left, and so we had plenty of room, and they moved back in with us, and we just started the commutes to Minneapolis and the surgeries and things for Nat, and eventually, and I'm horrible on the timeline, Maddie was done with her treatment after, so Nat had been on treatment for several months when Maddie finished her treatment, and so then we were just taking care of Nat, and eventually I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and fortunately that was a simple one, and it didn't require chemo except tamoxifen afterwards. But John was declining during this time and was finally diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia, where you lose words. And I first learned about loss of words and memories when we had adopted Kate. And the social worker said if she loses her Chinese, she will lose many of her memories of her early life. She was almost 5 when we adopted her. And true enough, when John lost the word for chicken, and knowing what a chicken looked like and what a chicken sounded like and what a chicken tasted like, there were all sorts of memories going, like of the fantastic chickens running loose in Dominica and things like that. But the decline was pretty slow in terms of the language, and ultimately he developed some short-term memory loss too. But he managed to be able to use his computer right up to the very end. So eventually, let's see if I can get the years straight. 2018, I think. Nat finally died after coming home for hospice, which was, as I said, a wonderful time and a horrible time. Maddie came home to help take care of her. Kate and Gabby were there, and Kate's friend Misty and her little daughter moved in with us. Gracie is the little girl, and she's got severe handicaps and genetic diseases. So during the day, I took care of Gracie and John, and John would get up and have his breakfast and go to the basement after a while, and he would ask if he would stop and see Nat for a few minutes. And Nat was, by this time, ensconced in the living room in a hospital bed so she could look out at Lake Superior and have friends. And Maddie would do her work in the basement or up at my desk during the day remotely, and then she would take care of Nat till like about 1 o'clock, and then Misty would get up and take care of her, and then Kate would take care of her during the day. And I sort of fed and tried to clean and keep the balls in the air. And all this time, Peace Church was there, and they raised money for us, and they brought us meals, and just wonderful support. So it's one of those things that I don't know what I would have done without. And one of the other part of my peace story was that sometime when I was still at UMD, I realized I was always busy working. I had 2 jobs because I was doing the review course teaching around the country, as well as teaching the medical students at UMD. And so I asked my friends that were in Trudy's book club if there was any chance I could join Trudy's book club, and it was just at the right time. They had room for one more person because we were still meeting in Trudy's apartment in those days. And so anyway, that group of folks has been just an incredible source of support to me over the years. So I think that's pretty much most of my. And I should say one of my other peace stories was I found out that teaching Sunday school was probably not one of my strengths. I loved teaching medical students. I taught 3rd graders. And I still have this wonderful memory of one of the lessons was on Korea, and they suggested bringing cooked rice, and there were chopsticks provided for the kids to have rice. And I had my daughter, who was full-blooded Chinese, and the Poe's daughter, who was half Japanese and half Chinese, and quarter each, and half Caucasian, and about 8 little boys. Oh my Lord, did they create a mess! And it found out that Sarah Poe was used to using chopsticks that were hooked together at the end, not the ones, regular chopsticks. And Kate wasn't that much better by this time. You know, this is like 4 years later. She hadn't used chopsticks. It was a mess. Anyway, so my experience with teaching Sunday school was not my favorite.
Well, this is wonderful, Louise. I'm just going to ask you one last question, and that is, if you could boil it down to one word, what would you say that you could describe Peace Church?
Wow. There's so many words that I could use, but it's so supportive of so many things in my life. And one of the things, especially when we were dealing with Nat, was it helped me stay focused on the outside world. But support for the world and support for my family, and it's been just wonderful. Maybe wonderful is the best word.